Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Messy Workbench. So today I have an Echo PB2100. This is fresh from the curb. Someone was throwing this out. As expected, it does not work. This is going to be a pre-emissions engine. You can tell that because the shroud is gray. The emissions engines have orange shrouds. Now, I can tell by looking at this has been sitting a long time. And also I know that the people who threw this out have a lawn service, so this probably just got left sitting when they hired the lawn service and hasn't been used since, and they finally decided to clean out the garage. So here it is. Now you can see the primer bulb is just completely falling apart. The fuel line's all rock hard, as well as the fuel tank grommet. And if we look in the fuel tank, let's see if we can get an angle where you can see that. So any fuel that is left in the tank, or was left in the tank, has now just turned into this nasty goo, which is obviously no good. So the plan is I'm going to bring this blower back to life. Now before I get started though, we need to verify that the engine is okay. It does have pretty good compression, but we want to make sure before we get too far in this. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some fuel in the intake, make sure it'll try to run. Our air filter is actually in really good shape, looks almost new. So we'll just pour a little fuel into the intake, see if it'll try to run. Alright, so with that we now know that the engine is in good shape and we can get to work. Now I've already taken the liberty of ordering some parts because I've done this before and I just know from experience what it's going to need. So we have a diaphragm kit. This is a G&D 38. New fuel tank grommet because the one that's in there is hard as a rock and will not seal. And then we have new fuel lines, which I always have on hand. I've also got a new primer bulb to go in there as well. Now the first thing I want to do is get this carburetor off. So there's 2 screws, carburetor will come right off. Linkage out, and yeah, those fuel lines are just completely shot. Before we start on the carburetor though, I want to put some cleaner in this fuel tank to help dissolve that goo, so I'll be able to dump it out later. So I've got some cleaner in there. Just give this a quick shake. We're going to set it to the side, and all that goo should be dissolved. I can just dump it out when I'm done with the carburetor. So the first thing I'm actually going to do, and I don't have to do it in this order, but I'm going to anyway, I'm going to remove these plastic caps that cover the mixture screws. This is what they used to do to keep you from adjusting the mixture, but after I do this I'm going to need to adjust the mixture, so I need those caps off there, and I figure I might as well do it right now before I disassemble the carburetor. I'm not actually going to remove these screws, there we go, during disassembly because I don't think that's going to be necessary. So pull this section off first. Okay, and you can see the fuel pump diaphragm, and it actually does look like it's still a little bit flexible. Obviously the primer bulb was gone. Yeah, look at all that nasty junk. So this is actually in pretty good shape, which is surprising, but this, yeah, this is just rock hard. So don't know how well that'll seal up. The proper gas diaphragm kit for these carburetors is actually quite cheap. I know people are going to say, why didn't you just buy a new carburetor? Well, a new carburetor for one of these is about $30. I think I spent around $12 for the diaphragm kit. Now you can get the cheap stuff, but in my experience the cheap stuff just doesn't hold up. And I'm not putting a lot of effort into swapping out these diaphragms, so I don't mind it. Alright, so this is going to be our metering section. And this is the part I was really worried about. Yeah. See, this controls your fuel flow. And this is... yeah, I don't know how well this is going to show up on the camera, but this diaphragm is just rock hard, and that's going to cause problems with metering. So in a normal rebuild kit, you get a new one of these needles and levers, but that's just extra effort to change out. I don't feel it's going to be necessary in this case. And look at that. Oh, our gasket came off nice and easy, so we won't have to do any scraping. And this is about as far as I need to go for tear down the carburetor. So this is going to go in the ultrasonic cleaner for a soak. We're going to give this about 30 minutes. Good heat. Just let it soak. So after a 30-minute soak in the ultrasonic cleaner, this is what our carburetor looks like, all nice and clean. Now if you look closely, you'll notice there is a fuel strainer screen that is still in there. That was in there before I put it in. I left that in, as well as the metering needle like I mentioned before. If you want to rebuild these carburetors completely and replace all those parts, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But in my experience with this kind of situation, it's really just more effort and more cost for parts. So anyway, we've got our new diaphragm kit here. Now this is a GND 38. It's a genuine Zama diaphragm kit, and that will be listed in the description below. I believe this is a K42 carburetor. I will correct myself on the screen if I am wrong about that. Alright, so I am going to put the metering section together first. So we'll start with this little spacer gasket, and then our metering diaphragm. Now for the fuel pump section. So this section also has the primer bulb. So we're going to go ahead and put that on. I have a new primer bulb here as well. Also a genuine Zama. So this piece we're going to put on here first. Just like that. And it's got those little dowels to hold it on. This one's nice and easy because it's curved on one edge, so you really can't get it in there backwards. Now, this screw right here is the throttle stop. You see, throttle's right there. So I want to hold that open. I'll hold open the throttle plate so it doesn't get in the way. Place them together. Just like that. And now put the screws in. And again, just gonna lightly snug these screws down. And there we have it. Our carburetor is all good to go. So now our carburetor will go on. Want to make sure it's oriented correctly. So our choke needs to be facing up. And in this case, the primer bulb faces down. Make sure that our linkage is in the right spot. And then I have a new gasket for it, which I made myself with some gasket material. And you notice there's this little hole. This hole is for the pulse from the engine, which will run the fuel pump. You want to make sure it's lined up with the hole in the carburetor, otherwise it won't run your fuel pump, and that is not good. Slide it into the linkage. And snug it down. Now the fuel line I'm using is Tygon F-4040-a. Now the regular Tygone is really no good, and when you expose it to ethanol, it'll just swell up, become ultra brittle and fragile, and just fall right apart. If you want any hope of your fuel line holding up, you need to get the Tygon F-4040-a. You can get this at Ace Hardware. You can also order online. Just make sure you're getting the right stuff. So since we have the fuel grommet out, I'm going to go ahead and thread it through first, and I'm going to start with the main fuel supply circuit. So I'm just going to estimate about where I want my fuel filter to sit. And that should be pretty good. Alright, now I'm ready to put my grommet in. The other fuel lines don't have to run down into the tank like this one, so I'm not too concerned about being able to get them in. A little bit of oil on the grommet so we can pop it in. Okay, so right about there. Okay, that's on. Now, some people might ask how you know which line goes where, and it's actually pretty simple. So the nipple that's closest to your primer bulb is typically going to be your fuel return back to the tank. The way you can check it is by simply pumping it and put your finger over each one, and you'll be able to feel pressure on the outlet and suction on the inlet. And that's how you know which one is which. So now we'll do our fuel return. So there's our fuel line on. Now this one just needs to stick down into the tank, so I'm just going to cut it off right about there at an angle so we can stick it into the grommet. And that's our fuel return. So now all that's left is our fuel vent, and this one is ultra easy as well. Just guesstimate how much line I want. Now we'll just stick this right in to our fuel grommet. Now sometimes there's a specific spot for these fuel vents to sit in, but I'm not seeing one on this, so I'm just going to tuck it up out of the way. And that's about it. We should be ready for a test run. I got everything all adjusted, and she runs absolutely fantastic. Couldn't be happier with the way this turned out. Parts will be listed in the description down below. Hopefully this helped you out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below. This is a blower I found in the trash. It looks better than the blower I use every single week. Kinda funny.